Here we are, December 6, 2002, about 6:30, quarter to 7, waiting for Mr. Tibbets. I think she was a wave in World War II, one of the few that was on the aircraft carriers. She dished out ice cream after every meal.
When we went overseas, realize this is June, my letters to home, I'm telling my folks that I'll be there a year. This is what I thought. Now, I do know my friends that were in the Navy, and they thought it was a long war. They thought it was going to last at least another year. I think all of us at that time thought we were in for a long war, and a dirty war, a mean war, and a killing war. Island we got closer to Japan, the casualties increased.
Now the war went on and was going on, and you have to understand during that period, people in the service were just really fed up with this. But under those conditions, if we could do anything to significantly shorten the war or end it, why, I think anybody would jump at the possibility. We can talk to young people, explain it to them and things, but until they've been involved in it, they just didn't understand what a total country effort this was. The war was, and everybody was involved in it. Not just the people in the service, although that involved just about everybody between the ages of 18 and 35, but the people working in the home front, building airplanes, building tanks, building weapons of war. That's all it was.
We're in General Ant's office, and he is instructing me as to my assignment. You are going to organize and train a unit to drop these atomic bombs simultaneously in both Europe and Japan. And he told me about using my my code word of silver plate, and cautioned me. He said, "Paul, you got a tremendous amount of responsibility there. You got a tremendous amount of authority. Be careful of how you use it." I was never challenged. Nobody ever asked me, can I drop the bomb? Or, have you made a decision who's going to drop it? If they had, I'd told them yes. Decision was made the first day I heard about it, and that's going to be me.
Paul told us we were going to drop a new type of weapon. He said that if anybody wanted to back out, nothing would be said. Nobody backed out.
I was brought into the radio shack. You're supposed to be Colonel Tibbets' radio operator. How many hours have you had in the air? I said, 10 at radio school. I was naive. So I didn't know what I was supposed to expect.
Wendover, Utah appeared to me when I got there as the ideal location. Isolated out on the Nevada state line, on the salt flats of Utah, and there wasn't very much there. There was nothing to attract any particular attention out there, and I thought, this is the place I want to be. It would be easy to keep the secrets in the Wendover.
Nobody ever mentioned the word nuclear. Nobody ever mentioned the word atomic. We just knew it was going to be a big explosion, a lot of destructive force.
During the bomb runs and tests, we're trying to get the ballistics for the two weapons. For the airspeed, you'd have to put in a different drift. You'd have to put in a different trail, which is how far the bomb, where it comes out behind the airplane. But it took me, I'd say, 2 to 3 months with the background I had to actually realize and believe that they were actually onto something as big as I'd heard. Because with my background, it's hard for me to visualize that one bomb could do what they said.
was ready to go to war by the month of May 1945. And I sent the word in to move the 509th organization overseas. I wanted them to get shot at. I wanted them to experience possible emergencies and everything before they had an atom bomb in the airplane and were really playing for keeps. I wanted the Japanese to see individual airplanes. I wanted them to think maybe that most of those single airplanes that they were looking at were reconnaissance airplanes, because they weren't interested in reconnaissance airplanes at that time. Hiroshima was definitely a military objective. It was also the place in which they were assembling all of their military equipment to resist an invasion.
We were given information about air-sea rescue units and what we would do in case of trouble with the bomb, trouble with the airplane, trouble from enemy action. Had the final briefing at midnight, followed by then the breakfast and down to the flight line.
You knew it was big. It was going to be a big one, and so you were. I think you were at a level a little higher than you do on a conventional mission. The biggest part of that after the briefing was coming out to the aircraft and seeing this tremendous amount of people around it, plague lights with shining all over the airplane, a big crowd of people out there. I mean, you were the center of attention. You were the monkeys in the zoo.
And I was sitting there in the seat ready to start engines. And of course, some of the cameras were still out there. And I stuck my head out to ask them, please remove the cameras and the floodlights and all that so we could start cranking up. And at the same time, somebody yelled at me and said, hey, wave at us. I had a bunch of lives on board this airplane that I had to give careful consideration to. And in that regard, I couldn't help but reflect on Chaplain Downey's prayer.
We pray thee that the end of the war may come soon, and that once more we may know peace on earth. May the men who fly this night be kept safe in thy care, and may they return safely to us. We shall go forward, trusting in thee, knowing that we are in thy care now and forever. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Now I watched the airspeed indicator go past 160 that night. And we were still on the ground. Those wheels were turning. But I was confident that this was the only way to do it so that I could control with the tail if I had to. So when I'm going down there and I kept it past that magic 140 that you know it was used to, he started to grab the yoke and pull back on it. He just lifted off. And I told him, I said, keep your damn hands off of that yoke. I'm flying this airplane.
Weather was very clear. We could see the coast of Japan from probably 75 to 100 miles away. And I went up and looked over Tom's shoulder, and we compared notes in the city and made sure we had the right target and picked out the bridge that was the aiming point, and then I went back and sat down. And it was in the bombardier's hands at that point.
Well, after flying as much as I had in Europe and planning missions from the very start, I knew a lot about picking up aiming points. It's something I could pick up as a bombardier real easy. And that the bridge that I picked out was right in the, almost in the center of the city. Made an ideal aiming point.
And then for 5 minutes, I was watching his head there, and he was looking at me and chewing on his cigar. And he said, ain't there a damn thing I can do? Nothing. It's going right down the track. And he had looked up at the bomb sight. It's on course. And it was on course until it left the airplane.
All I raised up and looked out right out over the nose, and Paul immediately started to turn, but I could still see it, because I wanted to make sure it was clear of the aircraft. Because I'd had some trouble with some of the tumbles here that when the window was dropping them. So I wanted to make sure it was falling clear, and it was going straight in.
still pretty close to it then, the mushroom cloud. It showed the cloud rising to about our level, which was in the neighborhood of 33,000 feet, if I remember right. And it also showed the turbulence engulfing the city and moving out into the foothills. And the only thing that I could see of Hiroshima was one of the docks and the bay.
Colonel Tibbets, will you tell us some of your reactions over the target? Well, as the bomb left the airplane, we took over manual control, made it an extremely steep turn to try and put as much distance between ourselves and the explosion as possible. After we felt the explosion hit the airplane, that is the concussion waves, we knew that the bomb had exploded, everything was a success, so we turned around to take a look at it. The sight that greeted our eyes was quite beyond what we had expected, because we saw this cloud of boiling dust and debris below us with this tremendous mushroom on top. Beneath that was hidden the ruins of the city of Hiroshima.
When we came back, we knew that war was over. There was no way that war could keep going on when what we saw had happened. But they would not admit to the fact. They didn't admit to Hiroshima. They finally admitted to Nagasaki, but even after they gave up, ceded, they didn't show any overt acts to stop the war. So it was necessary to have two bombs, and I think that we back on the ground that didn't fly the second mission were pretty doggone proud of that group of people too.
I think you have to say that you wish the war could have ended without flying missions of this type. But in the long run, I'm thoroughly convinced that the use of this weapon did shorten the war and save lives overall, both Allied lives and Japanese lives. Because if you play what if, and you say what would have happened if the bomb had not have been dropped, and you start looking at, fire bombs would have continued, even without an invasion, the casualties would have been very, very heavy.
War is bad, horrible. And even in Europe, my intention over there is the same thing as Hiroshima, was to help get the war over, to end the killing.
It's a devastating thing. It came as a tremendous surprise. It shocked people. If people can see the attitude that we have, the patriotism we had at the time, the sincerity of our beliefs today, I wanted to do everything that I could to subdue Japan. That was the attitude of the United States in those years. That 509 composite group was a great group of patriotic men. They all put their backs to the wheel, and we succeeded in bringing that carnage to an end, and everybody got to go home.
That the irregular organization being activated for service in the Air Force, they did not have those things. What I did was, with key people, we took an organization. For instance, one of the things I needed, I had to have transport groups. transport airplanes, I should say. And I requested 5 C-54s on a requisition and all that. And those 5 C-54s were for 2 things. Number one, to haul things that you couldn't have a bill of lading for. If you put it on a truck or a train or something like that, or an airliner, you had to have a bill of lading. We didn't want people to know what we were doing, what we were moving, because it was, you know, at that time it was none of their business. So that's why I needed those types of airplanes. I needed to move special people around. The scientists that were working at Los Alamos, they'd call on me to move them from one place to another. It was fine because I wanted my transport to get all the work that they could. As an aside, I don't know how many of you had anything to do with the Air Transport Command that was running during that time period. But after the war was over with, I happened to run into a man who was very knowledgeable on that. He said, "You hauled more freight per airplane for the Transport Command than the Transport Command could do for themselves." And he said, "I want to congratulate you. I want to express our thanks for all the things that you did." I had to be secure. I couldn't have people running around. Well, the only way I thought I could get the best security, either in the United States or on the Tinian Island, was I took a combat army company and shredded out of that the type of people that I needed to be able to guard airplanes 24 hours a day, to be available in case anybody tried to get to snooping around in them. And I say this because my airplanes were modified. They were not the standard B-29 that came out of the factory. These airplanes were ordered from Boeing, or from Martin, Omaha, excuse me. The Martin Airplane Company had a plant at Omaha, and my airplanes would come in from that plant. And I say that knowing quite well in advance, because the man that was making this assignments at Wright Field, he called me one day. He's a classmate of mine. We graduated together from the flying school. And he called me one day. He said, "Paul, I know you're doing something that's important. I don't know what it is. I don't want to tell you. I don't want you to tell me." But he said, "I know you're getting 15 B-29s." I said, "That's right." He said, "Would you like to have one of those B-29s? Would you like to have fuel-injected engines?" I said, "I sure would." "Would you like to have fast-acting Bombay doors?" I said, "I would like them very much." "How about Curtiss reversible pitch propellers?" I said, "I'd like to have those too." And he said, "I thought so." So there's 40 sets of them already on the way to Omaha. They're going to be on your airplanes. Now the airplanes come down the production line. They were taken off and run over to Offutt Field, where there's a hangar, and all of the modifications were made there by our people, my people, and help with the Los Alamos engineers. So it was done there. I had learned by one of the last tests that I ran, I guess, to determine the ability of the B-29 to survive fighter attacks. By coincidence, I was able to fly one day. I wasn't able, but if they weren't going to do any testing that day, I had to fly an airplane called a B-29 that I had flown there in, and that is to Alamogordo, where the tests were being run. That airplane had no armor plate in it, didn't have any holes in it, didn't have anything. It was a flying machine. And I got up on this track where the fighters were. There were in the group of fighters, all of the American fighters, all the British fighters, and a couple of the Canadian fighters, 2 Messerschmitts and 2 Japanese Zeros. And all of those made passes at this airplane, the target airplane. The route was at 25,000 feet, basically east and west, over 25 miles in length, over and back. Now I'm up there for a couple hours and just watching, and I'm watching these guys flying these fighters. I think, gee, they're great show-offs. They're big acrobatic. They come in, make a pass, and do all kinds of victory rolls and all that sort of stuff. And I thought, gee whiz, those guys are having a time. Well, after about 2 hours, I heard a little bit of mumbling on the thing. And finally, one guy said, "Tell him to slow down. I can't catch him." Another guy says, "I can't climb because my engine's overheating." And I looked down at my altimeter. I was at 31,000 feet. I put that in the back of my head. My safety going to war will be a lighter airplane to start with more power in the fuel-injected engines, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the way it worked out with those things. Now, I said security was really tight. It was tight. The man that the Los Alamos gave me, or they assigned to Wendover, Utah, and stayed with us all the way through, was a young lawyer, major. He was a lawyer and electrical engineer. His name was Uwana. And I said to him, I said, you know your business. You go. First off, he said to me, I will have in your organization when it's filled, I will have 12 of my agents in there to observe what's going on. Do you want to know their names? I said, I don't want to know their names. You're the only man that needs to know their names. They're going to talk to you. You'll talk to me. And that's the way we did that. Now, to get on even on the base at Wendover, you had to have a white pass. To get on the flight line, to get to an airplane, you had to have a green pass. You had to have a yellow pass, kind of yellowish-orange pass, to get you to the ordnance area. Now, that brings up another point. No Air Force organization that I know of was like that one, because I had to have tool and die makers, I had to have arc welders, and that was to make the cases that were going around and fit these bombs so that they could be dropped and we could determine some kind of ballistics for them. And when I'm talking about that now, we did do a lot of dropping of bombs, again, from 25,000 feet to get a set of ballistics that we could use when we got overseas, when we were bombing for good. These were facsimile type. They were all weighted. First off, they all had steel crates, steel forms around them. And in the case of the one that I dropped, which was called Little Boy, that was a bomb that was full of uranium only, and it would never be reproduced. And it wouldn't do it because of the fact it took as much uranium to make that explosion as it would take to make 6 of the Fat Man. Now, we'll talk with Fat Man and Little Boy. Number one, General Leslie Groves, who was the head of the Manhattan District, the Corps of Engineers man. He was a rather rotund type fellow. He really liked to sit in his office with a drawer there that he could pull back and get chocolate candy out of it and eat it. And of course, I guess his secretary had been told by his wife he was gaining too much weight. She'd go in and try to pull it away, and her name happened to be Mrs. O'Leary, and he would call, Mrs. O'Leary, come in here. And he'd come in. What did you do with my chocolates? And she said, well, I removed them. He said, move back, and so forth. Lester Groves didn't like slender people. He didn't like people that smoked. Oppenheimer, who was the chief scientist, he was a small man, a thin man, and he chain smoked. He even drank whiskey and ran around with women. Well, they were called the original odd couple. They couldn't get along without each other. Now, I'm not trying to brag, but when I came into the picture, I was the third man on the stool, three-legged stool. And I had, at one occasion with Leslie Groves, he said, you got more power than I have. I said, well, that's a different story, but I'm going to tell you just a second. With this kind of a deal, we had tough rules. Even the men in the outfit could not go into the airplane unless they had that pass. Of course, nobody could go with it, didn't have one, or was not supposed to have one. You couldn't go at the ordnance. It was the tightest place. I don't know how many yellow passes we had for the ordnance, but I would say they had a force maybe in the neighborhood of 50 people. Brings up another thing. When we put the outfit together, the Manhattan Security would not accept the military statements on the enlistment forms that required them to say what were you doing, where did you live, do all of this. They took every man in that unit, which eventually numbered 1,700 people. They ran their own security tests on them with their hometown police and so forth and so on. And the amazing thing about it was, I wasn't exempt from that. They ran it on me. And I learned that before I was given command by General Ed, because when I went to General Ed's office, I had to wait to see him because he had somebody in there. It turns out he had 3 men in there. 2 men from Los Alamos and, 3 men, yeah. Well, they were all 3 from Los Alamos. But 2 of the men were Admiral Parsons, Captain Parsons. He later became an admiral. Parsons was a naval gunman. He was wearing the stripes of a Navy captain at that time. He was a gun expert. And he was most valuable to the thing. He's the guy that came up with the idea of driving 2 pieces of uranium together in a 75mm cannon barrel, which was mounted, and then the framework that I talked about was supporting this thing, the cannon barrel. And when it drove at a certain speed, it was an explosion bomb called. When it drove at a certain speed and those two came together, it created atom split. They called it criticality. In other words, they had a nuclear explosion. The Fat Man bomb, the one that's supposed to represent, supposed to portray Leslie Groves, it had to be implosion. It had to be squeezed into exploding. It was the plutonium. I don't know what the mixture was. It had some uranium in it. In other words, the uranium for 1 bomb, like I dropped, would make 5 for the plutonium bombs. That was the cost of the uranium. Wouldn't permit us to be free. They knew that that was going to work, and that's why they put a lot of effort into it. They knew it would be successful. And of course, the idea then was the element of surprise. If you were going to show something, you had to show it doing what it could do, and that is you had to have an explosion. You couldn't take a chance on it. Now, with the other bomb, it had this center core about the size of a softball, and that core was surrounded by 36 blocks of Torpex, which was the highest rated explosive that was known at that time. They had to be burning equally as all 36 blocks had to be ignited and start to burn and burn at an equal rate. Well, now, it was a little bit of a job for our people to fit those things together. And the rule was they've got to fit together at every point so well that you can't get a cigarette paper through. If it didn't have taken, if it had more than that out of bounds, well, they'd have to start over again with another block so that until they had that closeness. And that again was to be sure of constant burning, constant pressure, and constant ignition. Excuse me. I unfortunately inherited, because I lost my salvo glands, both of them, I've got to dry them out. I just have to do this. Okay, let's go keep on talking a minute here about that investigation that they ran on the personnel, including myself. Major Uwana called me one day, and he said, you've got 5 escaped felons in your organization, fraudulent enlistments. What do you want to do with them? I said, but I don't know. Where are they? He said, they're in your ordnance squadron. And I said, oh? He said, yeah. I said, what let's do? Let me talk to the unit commander, the squadron commander of the outfit, and I'll give you an answer of what I want to do with it. So I talked to my man, Charlie Bay, and he said, those are the best damn men I got. They're tool and die makers. They don't ever even talk to each other, let alone talk to anybody else. He said, they don't cause me any trouble. One at a time, without knowing that they had been called in. It took a little time to do it. I didn't want them to know that I had talked to each one of these guys. Well, one at a time, I said, we know who you are. We've got a good report on you. Go back to your organization, keep your mouth shut and do what you've been doing. And when the war's over with, I'll give you this dossier and I'll give you a box of matches to burn it up. And that's what I did on Tinian. It was all over. I gave them a box of matches one at a time and they burned them up. And as I tell everybody, there's no way I could remember the names. I don't have a clue what they were, but they were good workmen. The other thing is, before I got the assignment, before I went into the office to see General Ed, a lieutenant colonel came out of his office. He was wearing the insignia of the Corps of Engineers. He walked over to me and said, I'm Lansdale. I want to talk to you. Okay, who's Lansdale? Why does the Corps of Engineers lieutenant colonel come out of the general's office and so forth and so on? But I said, strange things happen in this here wartime, and I'll, whatever it is, I'll ride along with it. I can't change it. So he had this folder with a bunch of things in there, and he said, now, I understand that you said so-and-so something to Dr. Harry Crum in Cincinnati when you were a student at the university there. I said, yeah, I did. And he said, another time you did something with Mrs. Crum, his wife, and this happened. I said, yeah, that's right. Well, he had 2 or 3 things more. He was right on every score. And then he looked at me and he said, what about you? I said, you ever been arrested? He said to me. I said, yeah, I've been arrested. What for? I said, well, my dad was good to me. He was able to give me a good allowance. He had bought me a nice automobile of my own and all that. I paid $550 for a new Chevy. And he said, what then? I said, well, habitually, there's nothing too much to do in Miami after dark and after midnight, so we would always go over to Miami Beach and get along the beach, North Beach, where it was not very well occupied. And one night, I told him, I said, one night, I was at Surfside, which is about 15 miles north of the beach, and I was over there parked in my automobile with the date, and we were in the back seat of the car in a compromising position when a flashlight comes in through the window, says, what's going on in there? Well, hell, he knew what was going on. He said, okay, I want you to follow me to the station house. Well, I followed him to the station house, which is a wooden shanty there. But again, because of political connections, I wanted to use his phone. He said, I'll let you use the phone, call anybody you want. And so forth. Well, he said, I want to use the phone first. And so I told him, yes, sir. I couldn't do anything about that. Oh, he filled out some paperwork. And then he picked up the phone. He said, you want to talk to Judge Curry, don't you? That was the municipal judge in Miami. I said, yeah, that's who I want to talk to. So he had dialed a number and he answered. He said, Judge Curry, this is so-and-so over at Surfside. He said, I got a man named Paul Tibbets here and he wants to talk to you. Well, Judge, I picked up the phone and the judge said, Paul, he said, the chief's going to let you go. I think he had 2-man police force, so he was the chief. And he said, let me talk to him. So, okay. He talked to the chief a moment. The chief said, you bet, Judge, I'll do just exactly that. He hung up the phone. He said, okay, go on, get out of here. I got all the information I need out of you. The paperwork's complete, and you've been released. And I said, thank you. Well, that was ended that one. But again, another side of this thing in security was out on Tinian Island. I was working on the wing of a brigadier general, a very nice man, named Davies. He was just as nice as could be. And one day I'm out on a practice mission. I'm checking where the guys are dropping their practice bombs and that sort of thing, and flying around. And I came back and landed, and one of the men from the headquarters, he came up and said, General Davies wants you to come up to lunch a little bit early because he's got some things he wants to talk about. Now, this general would always have his 4. He had 4 group commanders, and I was number 4, because normally the wing would have 3 groups. I was number 4. And I was placed there because Tinian was the place they wanted us to go. The security people who sent people over to look at those islands, they were going to dig pits, they were going to build an engineering section over there, a ordnance section that would be a credit to the thing. And so I went up there and I saw General Davies. He said, I went out to look at one of your airplanes today. I said, yes, sir. He said, when I stopped the car, got out, the guard challenged me. I said, yes, sir. I said, he would. And he said, the guard said, I recognize you, General Davies, but have you got have you got a green card to get on this airplane? He said, I don't need a green card. I got my AGO card. He said, with that, I took it out of my pocket and threw it at the guard's feet. They were separated by about 25 feet. And he said, I started to take a step forward. The kid lowered his gun. He said, one more step, gentlemen, and you're dead. He asked me, he said, would he have shot me? I said, no doubt in my mind he would have shot you, there's for sure. He said, I thought so. This reason I came back and called you. Well, okay, we had a lot of experiences of that type. Now, I'm going to go back even further than what I'm talking about. There's many things about the 509 that's hard to cover them in one session. But I was asked many different times, why were you selected to do the job of putting this thing together and making it work and all that? I said, I don't know. I didn't ask anybody. When they told me that's what I was going to do, I saluted and said, yes, sir. I said, the only thing I could say is, it's my belief, my conjecture, that I impressed some people well enough during the time that I was flying out of England and bombing occupied German possessions over on the continent, that I did things the right way. See, we didn't have any people that brief us, you do this, you do that, or something else. The mission that I led with the first 12 airplanes was the heavy bombardment strike. And we bombed the railroad marshalling yards at Rouen. All of this is to try to work into it easy. We knew the Germans would oppose this, but on the other hand, at this particular time, the Germans watched us. They saw us doing our thing, so to speak. And with that, they came in and struck us about the third or fourth mission. I don't remember how it was. They struck us real hard. They were serious. But up to that time, they'd come in and fly close and take a look and fire a couple of shots. We'd fire back at them and everybody would miss each other. And they would disappear. But they wanted to see what we were going to do. That was the key to the whole thing. And with that situation, I was leading a mission with more airplanes. At that time, I think I had about 15 airplanes to lead on a bombing trip. I don't even remember where I was going, but I was taking with me a senior colonel who was a friend of Hap Arnold's, and Hap Arnold put most of his friends who were colonels, he put them in charge of different bomb groups. And this man was in charge of one of them. We, as the 97th Bomb Group, got this baptism by fire before anybody else. So as other people came in, including Lieutenant Colonel Curtis LeMay, they had to ride with one of my airplanes, or not. When it came with senior officers, and as it did with this particular incident I'm getting ready to relate, I'm not going to name the man's name, he's dead now, but he was a man, I say, boy, everybody scared to death of that man. When he talked to you, he snorted through his nose, and he was known as a tough SOB. Well, he was assigned to ride with me, and he started riding. As we got to altitude, started on the bomb run, started to get there. He was standing up between me and the co-pilot with the turret, top turret, right behind his left shoulder. And there's not very much room there. We got struck by a fighter. It came in and made an oblique shot at us. It came through the co-pilot's window. It mutilated his left hand. It took out my instrument panel. It gave me a few pieces of shrapnel, from pieces of glass from flying out of the instrument panel. And before I could do anything, this colonel was up there. He was grabbing the fuel, he was grabbing the throttles for gasoline, and he's fooling with the turbos. Well, all he was doing was upsetting everything. And I didn't have time enough to say, Colonel, I please wish you would sit down. You're not supposed to do anything like this. In order to keep the formation together and keep us from going down by having the engines completely out of sync, I just took my elbow and hit him in the chin with my elbow, knocked him on his butt back there. And he came to pretty quick, but he came back up. We had the first aid kit and everything in his hands and whatnot. He started bandaging my top turret gunner. He got his head scalp creased, So we had blood in the cockpit, and he just did everything he could do. Well, when we were coming back to England to make our landing and stuff, he looked at me, he called me, first up here, I was at that time, I was a major, and he said, Major, he said, you did the right thing. I don't blame you for what you did. I said, yes, sir, I had to. He said, I know you had to. And he said, I didn't know I'd act that way. What I'm trying to say is, you can never tell what a person's going to do till you get them under fire. You have to be baptized before they can really put the cross on you and say, you're okay. And we never had any trouble with, I had one other man that I flew with me, Brigadier General, and this man was so petrified he couldn't move. He was back in the radio compartment where he got himself back in a corner, his knees up around his chin, and he was there just frozen. He was that way till we landed and had a couple of strong arm guys come in, including one of them being medical, and unbuckle him and get him out of the airplane. So now that's the most gory stuff that I could come up with to tell you. The rest of it was terrible, but as I say, I'm one of the people that hate war worse than you can possibly imagine. I've been asked, would you like to see nuclear weapons introduced into the present conflicts, or even before the present when they do a Desert Storm? I said, I don't think we should see it at all. Don't do it. We were getting so accurate, and we are so accurate today with standard type munitions. We don't need that. And the only thing that thing does is it just murders a lot of people. And of course, I was ready to murder Germans and Japanese. I had something against the Japanese because they ruined the best flying club I ever belonged to, because I only had to work 2.5 days a week, and I had an airplane to go anywhere I wanted to go with the government buying the fuel. What could you do for a better flying club? And they just upset the hell out of it. I had to get to work, and I got a few brains when I was working at it. I gave them a lot of exercise and did that. I think I've told you enough about that organization. I'm going to open up the discussion to questions, because I want to hear what you ask me. And Mr. Gary Newhouse, who's been helping me on these things for pretty close to 8 years now. And buying B-29s after the war was over with, because those engines didn't have any collector rings on them. In other words, to you uninitiated, they didn't have any mufflers. And those cylinders were sitting there pounding my ears for 500 hours. And I lost it over a period of time. But anyway, that's the fate of every guy that flew those B-29s without the collector rings. Jerry, you've got some questions, and maybe we'll get to answer all of them.
Well, you did a great job on the time. I see you're watching your watch.
I'm watching the watch. You've given me hell every time we've done this because I was overrunning.
Very good. How old will you be on your next birthday?
That has nothing to do with the war. But for your information and the folks here, I'll be 88 in February.
What year did you enlist in the Army Air Corps?
I enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1937, and I think it was the month of November.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Good question. In December of 41, there was a lot of training taking places by inductees that had been brought in. New units were formed, and they had to break them in and teach them. And there were more, there were more, what do I want to call it? More skirmishes. Well, anyway, ground troops exercising them as best they could. I was at Fort Bragg. We were flying all over that part of the country with A-20s. That's an airplane in those days. It was a good airplane. You flew at low altitude and all that. Matter of fact, when I qualified to fly with that outfit, they had all the pilots in there were much senior to me in years and in experience. But they took me and gave me some training and said, okay, we're going to send you out on the test. If you come back with clean propellers, you fail. If you come back with chlorophyll on them, you're okay, you get passed. Wow. I was riding on my way back to Savannah, having finished the maneuver at Fort Bragg, I was about 25 minutes north of Savannah when on the radio. I was listening to Radio Compass and following it to the destination there, Savannah. And the announcer came on, a little bit of an excited voice. He said, "Please stand by." He said, "We're going to have an important announcement to make." In about 20 seconds or less, he came back and he said, "We have just been informed that the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor." Well, I'm sitting there in nice sunshine listening to 2 good eggs, and I thought, what the hell is Orson Welles up to now? When I got back to Savannah, I found out.
Did you enjoy flying the B-17?
Oh yeah, the B-17 was wonderful, and I credit that B-17 with a big part of winning the war.
Before I ask this next question, I just noticed it happens to be a question from a former 509th member of Paul's, Howard Fleischman. Can you stand up, Howard? I don't think Paul and Howard has seen each other for all these years. Howard wanted to know if Curtis LeMay knew about the upcoming mission when you landed on Tinian. Did Curtis LeMay know about it?
Yes, I did let Curtis LeMay know about it because, number one, I wanted to go out to Tinian and talk to that gentleman. I wanted to also see Admiral Nimitz because I knew that I was the only one that could introduce to both parties what it was I was supposed to do, what we did with their weapons that we had and all that sort of thing. And I remember when I went out there, the outfits started moving out of Wendover. They started moving out in April, I think, the ground echelon, the ones that had to go by boat and all that sort of stuff. And I think it had been May or June that I flew out there, and I went to General May's office. And he was told I was coming, not what the business was. He was told I was coming. And when I got to his office, or got to his place, it was just about noontime. I think it was his office. And he said, "Stand by just a minute." He said, "We're just about to have mess." He said, "I want to do what I got to do here. We'll go and have lunch in the officers' mess. And when we finish there, we'll go over to my bungalow and you can tell me what's going on." And so he knew from that point of view. And after he heard what I had to tell him about the outfit coming out there, he sat there and chewed on his cigar and he said, "You think the damn things will work?" I said, "Yes, sir, I think it will." Okay. And then he looked at me, he said, "Have you told Admiral Nimitz?" I said, "No, sir, I haven't made an appointment with him. I was hoping I could get to see him." He picked up the telephone, called somebody at Nimitz headquarters, and he looked at, when he hung up, he said, "Take a staff car out there going over, he'll see you right now." I saw Admiral Nimitz, and I was really amazed. He was the quietest, most mild-mannered man I ever looked at, but he sure had a brain on his head. And so with that situation, he listed everything that I had to say to him, and the only thing he said was, "Are you getting all the assistance you need from the Navy here?" I said, "Sir, I'm getting all kinds of good assistance." He said, "Good. If anything comes up, you go to see him, the 3-star, and he was his vice commander, Admiral Kincaid." And I said, "Yes, sir, I will." Kincaid looked at me, nodded his head. Well, Kincaid came up to Tinian several times. He was there when I landed from Hiroshima.
The engines in the B-29 were not always reliable. Did you have a plan to abort the mission or ditch if you had to?
Okay, that brings in a different phase of my life. When I'm working for General Doolittle in North Africa, he called me into his office one morning and he said, "I've just gotten a call from Hap Arnold. He wants my most experienced field grade officer to return to the States and get on the B-29. Well, I'd never heard that B-29s before. What he meant was that he wanted somebody wearing a uniform to have something to do directly with the B-29 production and basically utilization and capability to fulfill the mission. On my way back to the States, the chief test pilot, he was the engineer, and he was the project officer for the B-29. What the heck is his name? Huh?
Eddie Allen.
Yeah, Eddie Allen. Eddie Allen was killed. When I got back to report to anybody, I was supposed to go to the bombardment section up in the Pentagon. I did that. I went up there, and I was told then that Eddie Allen had been killed, that Boeing was not operating the factory, that they said that the airplane was too much of a risk, and they didn't want to produce anymore, too many problems. Now, for your information, nobody ever heard of an airplane but ordered into mass production until everything going in and on that airplane had been tested in one way or another. And that's what happened. The airplane had been ordered, political directive, because Roosevelt had promised Chiang Kai-shek, that there would be B-29s over there in '43. Well, they didn't make it because of all these things. But they put me out on temporary duty for, I don't know, 60 days, something like that. And then I got another message. Go to Wichita, Kansas, and report to General Wolf. General Wolf, KB Wolf, was from Wright Field. He was an expert on airplanes, manufacturing of airplanes. He was a very good all-around man. He understood engines. He knew, a lot about a lot of things. And he was out going to Wichita with key selectors, people, from the engine department, from the radio department, and everything at Wright Field. He was going to go out there and see what was happening with the factory, because the factory had been told, if you don't manufacture these airplanes, you're going to give us $33 million, so we gave you to do it. Well, Boeing said at that time, they said they don't have the $33 million. That's what Arnold said, reported. I was told, Arnold said, yeah, I know that. That's the reason I said it. And he said, we'll accept the responsibility. When he said we, he's talking about the Army Air Corps would accept the responsibility for the airplane. Now, you bring up the engines, there was no power plant big enough to do it. Some of you guys are more knowledgeable. The Wright Whirlwind, when Wright Whirlwind, the engine 9 cylinders, was the best engine that was flying in the air, they say. I don't know, I never flew one, but that had a reliability factor of damn near 100%. So what they decided to do was take two Wright Whirlwind engines and marry them together on the Cummins crankshaft. Give each side a turbo and go from 900 horsepower single engine to 2,200 pound combination with turbos on it. They did this. The big mistake was made was, a mistake had to be accounted for. When they made the engine, put on the airplane, put it in the collie, there wasn't enough space for the air to go around, circulate around the engines and cool them properly, and that sort of thing. I lived through all of that phase, and what they had to do is to take asbestos type material and go into the engines and duct the air to fly back to the back end of it, where the three top cylinders were the one. Now, metallurgy wasn't what it was in those, what it is today. It wasn't the same in those days. And the problem was when these engines got very hot, the valves would separate from the stems, and the stem would go down in where the piston was pumping up and down with fire. And of course, that didn't do anything but cause engine fire and then airplane fires and so forth and so on. There was just more problems in that thing than you can imagine. But it was tackled. I flew those things for 15 months, one way or another. And I tell people, nobody ever has as much three-engine time in a B-29 as I had. That's where he's lived, happy guy, and so forth.
Yeah. Dick Nelson is still around.
Yeah, Dick Nelson, my radio operator. So Fairby died, leaving Van Kirk, navigator, Nelson, radio operator, Paul Tibbets, pilot.
Did you have anything to do with choosing the city that would be the first?
I had nothing to do with it. That was done by the War Planning Board in Washington, who were told to pick certain type cities in Honshu and the time of the year that it'd be best to bomb for visual conditions. We were supposed to drop visually.
How many hours was the overall mission out and back?
With my airplane, we were 12 hours and 6 minutes out and back.
Have you been back to Japan?
No, I tell everybody I don't need to go back. No, I've been asked several times, did you go back to Japan? And one man that asked me was Matsuo Fujiada, who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was a guest at my place in Tampa because the Self-Defense Force was sending people, 4 men, over here to go around our military bases to see how we were using the material that we were giving them to get their self-defense force built up. I didn't know Matsuo shot it from anybody. And my instructions were, you have a cocktail party and dinner, make the people fail at home, tell your officers and their wives you don't want any gathering of men on one side of the room and women on the other side, mix it up. And so when it came time to do all that, we did it, we had there, and I'm watching everything going the way it's supposed to go. There's all kinds of mixture, conversation going on. Now, with those 4 men, there were 2 young students from Chicago. They were Japanese, and they were over here as language students. They were sent with those people to be interpreters. Well, I'm there watching. I got a can of beer in my hand. I'm almost leaning on the wall. And a man neatly dressed in a blue suit, he walks up to me. He's carrying a can of beer. He sticks his head out and said, I'm Fashada. Shall we talk about it? Well, I did a take. I didn't know who Fashada was. He saw I was gasping for the fact that I didn't know who he was. He said, oh, hell, man, I led the attack on Pearl Harbor. I did it again. I said, well, as thought as hard as I could. You sure surprised us. He said, what the hell do you think you did to us? Now, he was a Harvard graduate. I could understand him all right.
Who was Enola Gay?
Enola Gay was my mother. As most every crew did, they wanted a name for the airplane. I wanted a name for the airplane. I asked my guys first, I said, any of you got an idea of the names you'd like to put on that airplane? And the heads were all negative. No, they didn't have any. I said, I got one I'd like to put, and that's the name of my mother, Enola Gay. I said, that name has been very little heard in this country, because every time my mother was introduced to somebody, they say, where did your name come from? And my mother said, well, I don't know, but my mother and my father had the name Enola, and the side that my grandmother came from, they had many women that were called Gay. So they just decided to put Enola Gay together. And that did. Now, by the same token, my father forbid me, as I was growing up, to stay away from motorcycles and airplanes, and so on and so forth. Well, when I got home, after being signed up as a flying cadet, I told him, I said, I'm leaving college. He said, what for? I said, I'm going to go down to San Antonio, Texas, and learn with the Army Air Corps, learn to fly airplanes. He looked at me, he said, okay. He said, I've been taking care of you pretty good. He said, that's finished as of today. You're on your own. I said, yeah, I know that. He said, go kill yourself. I don't give a damn. And my mother quietly looked, said, Paul, if you want to fly, you go ahead and fly. You'll be all right.
Did you like Bob Green's book, Duty?
I thought Bob did a wonderful job. Yeah, he told a story in case you haven't figured it out. You see, when we came home from the war, we'd had our belly full of talking about wars and all of that sort of stuff. We had family, or we're going to have families. We had to make a living some other way, and nobody wanted to talk about it. And Bob Green told me, he said, he never could understand his father. He thought his father didn't care him, didn't love him, didn't care about it. And I said, Bob, that's for the birds. He cared about you, but he just didn't have time to talk to you. You wouldn't have understood it anyway. And he said, I never thought of it from that point of view, but I guess you're right. I said, I know I'm right. And I've talked to a lot of men that have read that book, and they say the same thing. Yeah, we were too damn busy to talk about it because our children at that time weren't old enough by the time marched on, why other things occupied their minds and our minds too.
What is the status of the Enola Gay today?
Well, I could happily tell you that this Enola Gay is all parts and pieces are in the Garger facility in Suitland, Maryland, and as ready as they can get it to assemble it. But what they have to do is wait till the new facility in Dulles is built, and then they will go inside and put the pieces together, because they'll be able to take the big pieces in and get it together. It will then have a protective shell built around it, so that as the museum is finished, the Enola Gay will not be bothered. And by the same token, they have enough money to do all of that business, because I don't know, 4 years before that, 4 years, but now, a man came in to see Admiral Ingman when he was the director. And Ingman said, I've known this man for a long time, I'm not going to mention his name, but he came into my office, we chatted as we did frequently, and he said, by the way, that airplane Enola Gay, what are you waiting on? And he said, well, we can't do too much because we don't have that much money. They said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, we have programmed $5 million to restore that airplane and put it on display in Dulles. The guy, he said, the man sat down at his desk, he took out his checkbook, he wrote a check and handed it to me. He said, $5,500,000. It was written on there for Enola Gay. They couldn't use it for anything else.
Most of the rest of these questions really aren't questions. They're people thanking you that they didn't have to go to Japan. And one man wanted to thank you because he didn't have to go to Saipan. Before I ask the last question, after Paul responds to this, please do not stop him as he's walking out to go over to probably go to the bathroom. And he'll be in the other theater, the European theater, if you want to come over, say hello to him or take a picture or interested in his book. So, yes. Oh my goodness, and what is his name?
Dr. Roy Fetterman. He was the dentist, and he said that he had dinner with Paul the night before, and Paul said, we're going to drop the big one tomorrow.
Dr. Roy Fetterman, who was a dentist in the 509.
I remember the name quite well.
Boy, this is like a reunion here for you tonight.
Almost.
Okay, the last question that someone had was, given the same circumstances, would you have flown that mission
Today.
if you had to today? Yeah.
Well, yes, I've answered that one. I had no regrets on what I did. I did what I thought would be a benefit to many, many people. And I never hesitated in a thought about carrying it out as directed. And I would, you know, give me the same circumstances, I would still today, I'd do the same damn thing over. Thank you very much. You're a wonderful audience.